back to another episode of Icon Webcast. My name is Richard Santana. I'm the managing partner of Colectivo 360. We are a real estate and consulting firm in Puerto Rico. On this episode, we'll be speaking with an attorney, CPA, entrepreneur, and investor who has been one of many to relocate to Puerto Rico under Act 2022. We welcome my friend, Sean King.
Thank you, Richard.
Thanks for being here.
My pleasure, truly.
So, Sean, tell us a little bit about your background.
So, I'm an attorney and CPA, but I really have not practiced too much in either of those worlds. I really am more of a serial entrepreneur.
Great.
We founded an investment advisory firm back in the early 2000s that ultimately got rolled up into a larger firm. We had a retirement plan consulting administration firm that we still run today. I'm involved in the captive insurance business and participate in managing a captive insurance business from here in Puerto Rico. We have a yoga studio back on the mainland that we manage, so involved in lots of different types of business ventures.
Very diversified. That's interesting. So, Sean, what brought you to Puerto Rico?
We love Puerto Rico. My wife and I started visiting the island probably a decade or more before we moved here. We visited it 6 or 8 different times for spring breaks,
Great.
for vacations, fell in love with the island, loved the people, love most aspects of the culture, and really had a dream to one day live in the Caribbean and Puerto Rico in particular. We learned about the tax incentives. And quite frankly, I think it was the tax incentives that made the move possible. What I think people don't fully appreciate is the risk involved in relocating your business or relocating your family to a different place, especially when it's a different culture than what you're accustomed to. You don't know whether you're going to fit in. You don't know whether your children are going to enjoy school or not. You don't know whether you're effectively going to be able to manage your businesses remotely. It's a tremendous risk, and it takes some sort of significant inducement, I think, to convince even people like me who love this island and wanted to be here to take on that risk. And so I think that's largely the purpose of the tax incentives. And at least in our case, they did their job. They induced us to take a risk to move here to Puerto Rico.
So, once you made that decision and you moved down here, are you able to effectively run your business from Puerto Rico?
Yes. I envisioned from the beginning that in today's connected world with video chats and with Zoom meeting and with all the other ways that you can connect with people today, that it would be easy enough to manage affairs, to have meetings, to conduct business remotely. And by and large, that's been incredibly successful. I was here for over 310 days in 2018, same for 2019. I hope to be here more than that in 2020, though we'll see how that pans out. So absolutely, I do have to travel for business some. I'm always excited to return to my home here in Puerto Rico when I do. But I've been able to manage the business affairs of the various mainland businesses very effectively from here in Puerto Rico.
I love that you just mentioned a word, home. So, what is it that they don't tell you about Puerto Rico? Because you heard about the incentive, you heard about other people moving down here. But what is it that they don't tell you about Puerto Rico that now that you're home?
Right.
What is your perspective for those who are thinking about moving to Puerto Rico?
Yeah, I don't know if I wasn't told some of these things or maybe they just weren't emphasized quite enough. But we did have some surprises. I'll mention just a couple of them here now. First of all, under the incentives program, the ones that we're involved with anyway, I think it's important to understand that under Act 20 in particular, which now I think is under a new
Act 60, yeah,
Act
correct.
60 now, but under that particular act, it's really only certain types of businesses that qualify for the favorable tax treatment, in particular export service businesses. And so if you're sitting here in Puerto Rico, and in order to qualify for the tax incentives, you must be providing services to people outside of Puerto Rico.
Correct.
To the extent that you're providing services for folks here on the island, it's great, but you're not going to get the favorable tax advantages for that portion of the work that you do. So that probably wasn't emphasized quite clearly enough. Another thing that wasn't emphasized is that Puerto Rico presently, although it may have changed under Act 60, it was at one time the case anyway that they would only issue the grants to entities, to corporations or LLCs, not to sole proprietorships.
Correct.
And I previously conducted some of my businesses as a sole proprietor. So moving to Puerto Rico and figuring that out meant that I had to sort of restructure how I conduct some of my business in order to be able to qualify for the tax incentives. On kind of a more personal note, some of the surprises. Puerto Rico has more of that Spanish civil code sort of legal system.
Correct.
So the laws here are just very different. The property laws, the inheritance laws. Puerto Rico has, for example, a forced inheritance regime, which basically says that if you're a Puerto Rico resident, when you die, 1/3 of your estate basically goes to your children pro rata.
Correct.
1/3 must go to your children in whatever discretionary percentages you want to leave to them, and another 1/3 can essentially go to whoever or whatever you prefer. And for folks coming from the mainland, who are subject to U.S. estate taxes, folks born in Puerto Rico and who live here and reside here when they die aren't, but folks who move here from the mainland are, that can really complicate one's estate plan. There are ways of using certain trusts here in Puerto Rico to if you have an Act 22 decree, for example, or grant, to minimize the impact of some of those forced inheritance laws. But those sort of things are just things that you're going to need to work through over time once you get down here. Wills and trusts, prenuptial agreements and postnuptial agreements, all of that sort of personal planning you're probably going to need to revisit.
Going back to, you mentioned you're more, you see yourself more as an entrepreneur and an investor. Thinking about Puerto Rico, what are your thoughts? I mean, is it a good time to invest in Puerto Rico? How do you see our market, whether it's general investment or just real estate?
I'm a bit of a contrarian, and it's served me very, very well. There's among contrarian investors, there's a saying, and it can be misconstrued, so I hope nobody misconstrues what I'm going to say here. But the saying's very famous, and that is that the time to invest is when blood is running in the streets. And thank God there's not a lot of literal blood running in Puerto Rico's streets. But when you look at what has happened to Puerto Rico with the financial crisis that started in 2006 when some of the prior tax incentives expired, the resulting quasi-bankruptcy process that it's going through as a result of that, the 2 hurricanes in a matter of a couple months, and now some earthquakes, there's probably no better investment opportunity that I can think of pretty much worldwide at this point than Puerto Rico. Puerto Rico is definitely, I think, at or very near a low, and there's a tremendous amount of potential upside from this point forward. I'm particularly encouraged by a few things. Number one, unfortunately, Puerto Rico is known for having, for U.S. standards anyway, unusually high levels of corruption. I think every government is corrupt in some form or fashion, but it's maybe a little worse here than in many places, but that's being rooted out. I mean, the people rose up en masse and peacefully, without a single death or severe injury, ejected a governor that they felt was corrupt and not serving their interests. The FBI, who was once here and really only took an interest in drug trafficking and terrorism concerns, is now involved in multiple anti-corruption investigations, in part because of the federal bailout money that has come after Maria. They want to make sure that that money isn't mishandled. You've got the federal bankruptcy judge now who's very involved in the process, who likewise wants to make sure that creditors aren't defrauded through corruption and the like. You've got the very unpopular oversight board, but it is playing, I think, a check and balance on the system as well. So for the first time, and as long as I can remember, you've got an incredible amount of scrutiny on Puerto Rico. Combine that with the fact that it's at a relatively low point, that we're rooting out a lot of the systemic problems and challenges that it's faced historically, and I can't think of a better investment thesis than Puerto Rico these days.
And to your point of natural disasters, it's part of humanity. So it is true that investors, when there's natural disasters that create some short-term havoc, are going to create interest just because the real estate values goes down. But what I've seen from our side of investment, people that are believe are bullish on Puerto Rico on the long term will see this disasters as an opportunity. And being responsible and socially aware of the tragedy, I think it's actually an opportunity to, in areas that have been devastated, to actually construct correctly, and through whether it's innovation or technology, just probably mitigate. Because the reality is that natural disasters are part of everywhere where you go. So just going back to corporations or individuals that are in the States that I have heard of Puerto Rico's robust tax system, what would you tell them regarding Puerto Rico? What should they be in the lookout for? What would you recommend of somebody that is looking into Puerto Rico? What would be like the bullet points that you would suggest to them to make sure they consider before moving down to Puerto Rico?
Well, certainly if the tax incentives are an important part of the equation, and for many there are. It's not this is not a very desirable location. It's just that there's risk involved with change, and asking people to move to an island in the Caribbean is a lot of change. And as desirable as it is, when you have your roots firmly planted on the mainland, you're often going to need some help, some aid, some transition money. And for lack of a better word, that's what those tax incentives often do. They provide some transition money, and they help compensate for the risk of moving. So I think if tax incentives are part of the equation, you're just going to want to really take a look at what those incentives are, at what needs to be done to qualify for those incentives, and whether or not you can successfully, if need be, restructure your business in a way that will benefit from them. Not every business is going to be eligible. A great many are. And among those that are, they're often going to require some restructuring, and sometimes that restructuring is expensive. But again, that's part of what the tax incentives help offset is the cost of restructuring your business to make the move to Puerto Rico. So, there's a lot of folks down here who have moved to Puerto Rico. There's unfortunately, I think, a very small but unusually vocal minority of folks here who are hostile to immigrants, who are hostile to the tax incentives, and they make their voice known and make their voice heard. But by and large, the welcome that we have received here in Puerto Rico has just been overwhelming. I mean, people like you, Richard, people that have just gone out of their way to make us feel at home. We have made more friends here in Puerto Rico more quickly than we have anywhere, and despite our efforts for the last 2 years, we are not fluent in Spanish yet. So
Not yet.
We're working on it. That I think is a testimony to Puerto Rico and to its people, that it is so very incredibly welcoming. So come, don't listen to the naysayers. Don't listen to the folks who are anti-incentives or anti-immigrants to the island, some of these more nationalistic types. By and large, the people here are welcoming. The business environment, quite frankly, could be a lot freaking better. There's a lot of work to do.
There's room for improvement. You're correct.
To reduce regulation and make ease of doing business better. But hey, again, that's part of what the tax incentives help compensate for. So it's a dream life for us. We're here every minute that we possibly can, and certainly want to invite anybody on the mainland who has questions or concerns and wants to learn more about our experience to reach out through you or contact me directly, and would be happy to talk more about it.
So Sean, thanks to you for taking your time and speaking here at ICOM Webcast. Remember, registration is open for ICON. It's going to be February 25th and 26th at La Concha in Condado, Puerto Rico. You can go to our website, prinvestorsconference.com. So please save the date, 25th and 26th of February, La Concha, Puerto Rico. Thank you for your attention.